Hello, everyone. For those of you who don't know, we are the Youth Climate Ambassadors for Wales, a group of 13 to 25-year-olds who aim to empower the youth voice and fight for accessible climate action. And today we are doing something a little bit different to what we usually do. As you may know, the United Nations COP27, probably the biggest annual event for climate activists, took place recently in Egypt. Now, whilst YCA members didn't physically attend, we wanted to share what our reflections were as young people from a devolved nation. And that's what we hope this video will do. And we hope it starts some conversations amongst you guys too. So we'll get straight into it. Firstly, we're going to introduce all of our members. I'll start. So my name's Shanona. I'm Vice Chair and Comms Officer for the Youth Climate Ambassadors for Wales. I use the pronouns she, her, and I'm 19. And we'll pass it on to Alfred.
Hi, my name's Alfred. I take the pronouns he/him. I'm 18 years old and I'm from Pontypridd, which is a town a bit north of Cardiff. I'll pass it on to Rajri.
Hi, I'm Rajri. I'm also a YCA ambassador and I'm 16 from Cardiff and I go by the pronouns she, her. I'm going to pass it on to Lily.
Hi, my name's Lily. I'm also a YCA ambassador. I use the pronouns she, her, and I'm from Pembrokeshire in West Wales, but I'm currently studying at Cardiff University. And I'll pass it on to Caitlin.
Hi, I'm Caitlin. I'm also a YCA member. I'm 19 years old. I'm from a place called Swansea, and I use the pronouns she/her.
Perfect. So we'll get straight into the questions. We've accumulated some that we thought were really important and just ones that YCA members wanted to answer. And then at the end, we've got a few questions from young people in Wales. So our first question, and probably one of the most important ones, is what do you guys think were the biggest outcomes of COP27? And we'll pass it on to Caitlin.
Thank you, Shanona. First and foremost, I'd like to say I feel this year's COP has reassured and resulted in some very important decisions that needed to be made and allowed me, and I'm sure many other people as well, to have some clarity on things that we cared about. So for me personally, I think one of the most effective things to come out of COP27 is the new funding arrangements that were established to assist developing countries dealing with loss and damage because of climate change. I'm very happy that dedicated funding is going to be put in place for these people who don't really have a voice in the room where all these things are being discussed, so to speak. A package of decisions was made this COP, which I feel is amazing. I know certainly after past COPs, I, maybe as well as probably some other people, have felt coming out of it a little bit unsatisfied with the outcome, when many things were left kind of up in the air, so to speak, with a lot of decision making. So I'm glad things are being prioritised in a swift manner rather than just a debate on it with no really definite end to it. Also to mention, all countries reaffirmed their commitment to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 Celsius above industrial level. And as a part of these sort of package decisions that were made at COP this year, it allowed action through countries to discuss how to adapt to the impacts of climate change kind of in today's, like this year, which is good to keep up to date with everything. Sometimes the main priority I feel is lost in a political debate, and I feel comfortable knowing that the main priority, which I feel is the global temperature rise in our emissions, has been reaffirmed and kind of adapted to today this year. And I feel like the outcomes this year felt more, in a way, not blunt, but they felt more like this is what we're doing. These are the things we want to look over to make sure everything's up to date. And I felt more content with the outcomes this year. Thank you, Shanona.
Thank you. So Alfred, do you want to give your perspective on this as well?
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin. And as Caitlin touched on, I thought it was very clear that the biggest win from COP27 was the establishment of a loss and damage fund. But I do actually have concerns about how and whether this will be funded. The UN suggests that it should come from the large profits made by global fossil fuel companies, which I can see massive complications with, such as how are you going to make these international companies pay? And also, when you target any large corporation financially, it is not the corporation that suffers most often, it is the disadvantaged people connected to the corporation that suffer, since the corporation compensates for their loss in profits with further exploitation. Now, alternatively, if it is the governments of the world who are expected to pay, then I am also sceptical, since they have historically failed to keep to promises relating to climate change, making it difficult to trust them. Now, another outcome of COP27 is that the significance of biodiversity has been recognised and has gained greater consideration in the climate strategies of countries across the world. But this is, of course, very vague. And I think the ambiguity in our goals is the last thing that we want when it comes to tackling climate change, as we have learned from experience. But overall, I would say that there have been some good outcomes from COP27, but these outcomes were just quite simply not adequate, and that more needs to be done than this, despite these outcomes being very beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you both. There were some very important things brought up there, and I think people will find it very interesting to hear. So my next question is, do you think the main themes of discussions in COP27 this year were the right ones? So we all know that climate change is a really broad issue. It affects all walks of life. You know, social justice and climate injustice are all linked. So yeah, do you think that the main themes of discussions were the ones that you would have chosen? So I'm going to come back to Alfred for this one.
Yes, I thought they would to some extent, but not fully. As I said before, I thought the main achievement from COP27 was that establishment of a loss and damage fund. But the fact is that this actually does nothing to mitigate the development of climate change. It only combats its effects. While I fully appreciate the importance of a loss and damage fund, I also recognise that unless climate change is fought directly, these losses and damages are only going to become greater and greater. A quite fitting analogy to demonstrate this goes as follows. So a man burns down 1 tree on the first day, 2 trees on the second, 4 trees on the third, and so on. It's clear that the solution is not just to put out the fire in each tree every day, but that it is to stop the man starting the fires in the first place. By only focusing on fixing the damage of climate change, we are doing the equivalent of putting out the fire in each tree every day. And eventually we are not going to be able to keep up. I would have liked to have seen this loss and damage fund as well as a concrete global commitment to a strategy for how we can stay within the global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius. After COP26, countries agreed to change their plans for reducing emissions, but COP27 only saw 29 out of the 194 countries submit new or updated plans. Clearly, we are lacking emphasis on how countries are going to stick to the 1.5 degrees target. So hopefully we can see a greater focus on this at COP28. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred. That was really informative. So Rodri, do you think these themes of discussion were the right ones, or do you agree with Alfred there was a little bit of disparity?
Yeah, thank you, Shanaina. Well, definitely going on from what Alfred and Caitlin touched upon, it's definitely an achievement that in COP27 there had been some sort of commitment to address loss and damage in the final agreement. I think it serves as a source of global recognition that it's primarily less economically developed countries that are suffering the most from the impacts of climate change, despite the more developed countries being the principal contributors to global greenhouse gas emissions. This is even more poignant when we recognise that COP27 took place in Egypt. And although the African continent is only responsible for 3% of total carbon dioxide emissions, it is disproportionately affected by the climate crisis. However, it can be said again that at this moment in time, it's only an agreement. Discussions on the decisive plans regarding the establishment of the funding has been delayed to COP28. This is when the first meetings of the committee, which is referred to as the Transitional Committee, responsible for operationalising the funding, has been planned to take place. And additionally, a failure of COP27, similar to the outcome of COP26, is that we do not see a clear commitment by countries to phase out the use of fossil fuels. Due to this ambiguity, it is very likely that greenhouse gas emissions will continue. And like Alfred mentioned, this is going to take us even further from our goal to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Thank you.
Thank you both again. So COP27, all these COPs, United Nations conferences, have been notorious for not having young people in the room making the decisions. But it's become clearer and clearer that young people are extremely passionate and should be heard. So we wanted to hear, what does COP27 mean to you guys? So we're going to start with Caitlin. What does it mean to you?
Thank you, Shanaina. So I think to start, particularly in politics and political debates, a lot of things that need to be dealt with and discussed get lost in the midst of it all. talking about COP, with so many voices are fighting for different things. You can't really get definite decisions on things. I'm obviously very grateful, as I'm sure all climate activists are, that COP exists, you know, a worldwide event of discussion over something that is destroying so many people's lives and so many homes, and it's getting recognition in that sense. After this year's COPs, decisions and points were, I felt some were being knuckled down on and decided. Going off what Roger and Alfred have said, I think every COP should be should be somewhat positive. I think for me to come out and say, no, decisions were made this year, that's good, it should be like that every year. So it means a lot to me that it exists, but I think that it could be developed on quite a bit in regards to getting things done a bit more swifter, not just COP27, but all COP. For example, talking about decisions being made, in the draft decisions of COP27, or the draft decisions of their article, they looked over Article 2 of the Paris Agreement. It was recalled, reaffirming the outcomes of previous COPs, especially last year's COP, looking at, as countries, their commitments to collective global response and how we can improve from last year. That felt a lot more productive than last year to me. Like things were getting done better than they were last year, but obviously this should have been done a lot quicker. Despite the fact I believe climate action should be happening as fast as possible and something on the forefront of every political leader's minds. We can't have everything. So COP27 significantly meant a lot to me this year, as I felt a package of decisions were made, although I do agree with what Alfred and Roger touched on. It should be like this more often and not just, oh, they made decisions this year, that's really good. But personally this year, I am more content than last year that decisions were made. So yeah, it means quite a bit to me as a climate activist. Thank you, Shona.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask the same question to Lily. What did COP27 mean to you?
Well, following on from the great points that Caitlin made there, I feel like for me, honestly, I had and still do have very mixed feelings about COP. On the one hand, like seeing hundreds of people from all over the world coming together to discuss and plan actions to solve our planet's biggest problems is in itself an amazing event. And on the surface, everyone seemed to be saying the right things, the right decisions seemed to be being made, everyone seemed to be saying the right kind of things. But then as soon as you started looking a little bit closer, kind of as a lot of people have touched upon, like there weren't any concrete plans put in place as to how all of these things they were promising were actually going to be happening. And it feels impossible to be hopeful for a future of social and climate justice when COP was being held in a country that doesn't even respect a person's right to protest. And now after COP's finished and all the world leaders have flown home, a lot of them on private jets, concrete action is still not being taken. And it's all very well to have agreements and make promises, but when the people and the countries that are being most affected by this climate and ecological disaster are still not receiving the aid and actual changes that they need, then progress is still not being made. So having the loss and damage fund is progress, but until that's actually being put in action and people are seeing the benefits, then I don't think we can really be too happy about all of it. And I'm doing a zoology degree at university at the moment, and I'm constantly learning about how badly our planet is suffering, and all at the expense of our inaction. And seeing another COP go by with just more talk really fills me with frustration, sadness, and anger actually. So quite mixed feelings about COP.
Yeah, of course. Thank you both. So myself and a few others have touched upon, how important this is for young people and young people everywhere, how often it is that we're overlooked in these kind of discussions, and especially coming from a devolved nation, Wales has notoriously not had a delegation in these conferences. So our next question is, as a young person living in Wales, do you feel that these global conferences are relevant to you? So I'm going to hand it back over to Lily. What do you think?
This is another really great question. Yes, I feel that any conference that talks about issues that affect us globally is definitely relevant to me living in Wales. And they're relevant in the sense that they're discussing and making decisions that will not only impact me as an individual, but as us as a human race, now and for generations into the future. However, there was far less in the media this year, I feel, about COP, especially in Wales, kind of with it not being in the UK this year. And I really struggle to engage with it quite often, keeping up to date with the process, as it feels so disheartening to hear about another plan that's been made, but with no practical measures. I also feel that generally there is a massive disconnect between young people and global conferences, as often feel really far removed and you often struggle to find representation, especially as an example this year where you had a room full of 110 world leaders and only 7 of them were women. And I passionately believe that all global conferences are relevant to everybody globally, but they are most certainly not representative of everybody globally. And until they are truly representative of everyone, the people allowed to be present will always be able to push their agendas far beyond that of anyone who just has to hope that somebody they didn't even get a chance to vote for raises anything that they're concerned about.
Great, thank you, Lily. And more specifically, Rodri, I'm going to ask you, do you think that COPs are relevant to us as young people in Wales?
Yes, I think without a doubt. But it's definitely true that on one aspect, from my perspective as a young person, it is especially daunting seeing the ineffectual and even feeble outcomes of these conferences, which completely contrast the sheer significance of climate change on the planet. On the other hand, there is a positive aspect, which is that the takeaways from COP27 do encourage countries across the world to take action and get involved, including Wales, through these final agreements. They also have the potential to lay out clear strategies on tackling issues such as reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which is particularly relevant to us, the younger generation, as we will be suffering from the consequences if these plans and strategies are not put into action. To make a long-term difference, it really is important for young people to get involved and have a say in current politics. This is going to be crucial in making sure that we are properly represented during these decisive conferences. Climate change is a global emergency, and these conferences will determine whether or not we're going to do something about it. This crisis is an issue of today and an issue of tomorrow. So all the decision making related to the environmental disaster is going to be more relevant than ever to us as the younger generation.
Great, thank you very much. So that brings to a close this section of our little video. Your answers were all incredible. They've definitely sparked some thoughts for me personally. So I really think that they're going to, open some discussions, make people think more about things. So thank you guys so much for answering our questions. So now we're going to do a bit of a Q&A. We've mentioned, Lily and Rodri just mentioned it really nicely. Representation is always important when discussing global issues, human rights, climate injustices. So we thought it would be a bit ironic if 6 people here started talking about representation and climate injustice. So we wanted to open it up to more young people in Wales, and we've done a bit of a Q&A. So we've got 2 questions from young people in Wales who, are passionate about this or who are just looking for answers from you guys. So we've got Poppy here now to answer our questions. So before we start this part of the Q&A, Poppy, do you mind just introducing yourself?
Absolutely. It's been so amazing to hear all of our other amazing YCA members' answers as well. Yeah, I find it really inspiring, and especially to get questions from people across Wales, it's really awesome. But anyway, my name is Poppy. I use the pronoun she, her. I'm 18 years old and I'm from Newport in South Wales. And I'm really proud to be the chair of the Youth Climate Ambassadors and to get to work with all of these incredible activists. It's truly an honour.
Brilliant, thank you. So if you're ready for the first question, we've got a brilliant question from Ella and Ceredigion. And I think, if anything, this is the most important question and one I was asking myself tons of times, myself. So Poppy, her question is, what happens next?
That's a very important question and a very big question depending on how we want to look at it. I think in order for us to appreciate what happens next, we almost need to appreciate where we've been. So I think currently we exist in a system that ultimately isn't sustainable. As you've already talked about, ultimately this system is built upon the foundations of lack of representation, it's built upon the foundations of oppression and ultimately unsustainability, which further creates a climate crisis. And so because of that, in order to appreciate where we need to go next, I think it's our responsibility as individuals and really as a society to recognise that our current system isn't working and isn't where we need to continue to go. So I think then that really gives us 2 paths as in where we go next in a very kind of literal sense as a society, and especially after COP27. If we continue with the system we're in, ultimately the delegates, the countries that attended COP27 will begin to formulate plans, hopefully, on how they will achieve the objectives they set forward.
as you've seen in the past, often these plans don't fully appreciate the entire holistic picture that climate change really represents. And so because of that, a lot of important voices from Indigenous people to women to young people are often neglected, which ultimately creates an unjust transition. However, if we continue kind of in the system, countries will go away, they'll make pitches, they'll make claims, they'll try and fulfill these plans, and then in a year's time at COP28 they will kind of revise them and see where we're at. And ultimately, as we've seen over the last year, that doesn't always create the most incredible action. Sometimes businesses continue to go without being held accountable, and big governments and really people with power continue not to act with the urgency that we need. So that's one of our options, and while that sounds bleak, the other option is that as a society and our world leaders and our individuals will actually begin to appreciate the urgency with which this crisis exists in. And with that will not only come quicker action, but I also think with that comes an increase in representation, whether that may be young people, whether that may be women or Indigenous people. Ultimately, to create the change we need to consider all of those voices. So I think in kind of the second, my version of a utopian solution, there'll be an increase in representation and then quicker action that really hits the places that needs help and that needs aid, especially within this climate crisis. However, I think in both scenarios, something that will definitely happen next and that needs to continue happen is the youth voice and the role of youth activism. So as an individual, it can seem really overwhelming when you think, oh my gosh, what's the Prime Minister going to do next? What's going to happen in America? How are they going to respond? And that can be really scary. But ultimately, when considering what happens next, we do have power in that and we do have a stake in that game. And so when you're considering what happens next, I think we need to consider it for ourselves as well. I think now the youth movement, we know, absolutely put climate change on the top of world leaders' agendas. And ultimately, that doesn't mean our job is done. That means our job is just beginning. So I think as young people, our role is to continue to put pressure on, to continue to really kind of be engaged and to hold these world leaders and these big businesses accountable to create the change you want to see. And that ideal solution that would, in my opinion, be option 2 in that situation. So yeah, in terms of what happens next with governments and with businesses, it can be really hard to say and that can be scary. But in terms of youth action, I know that that's something that's going to continue and something that's really going to keep pushing climate change at the top of all leaders' agendas, even if they don't see it there yet. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, perfect, Poppy. I think you gave people a lot of food for thought. So thank you. And I just wanted to mention, I think it's really important. It's really empowering that someone's asked that question. And like you said, it can be quite daunting. I think it's important to remember that what happens next is not one person's responsibility. Like you mentioned, it's for everyone as a society. So if you're feeling overwhelmed or if you don't know what to do next, likelihood is everyone else is feeling like that too. But if we all just chip away at it and support each other, I think probably, like you mentioned, a lot of things can happen. So thank you. Our next question is from Hassan in Conway. He said, do we as young people really have any influence over what happens at conferences like COP27? And I think that's a really important question, and it kind of shows what young people can be thinking. So Poppy, do you want to answer this as well?
Yeah, definitely. That is such an important question. First of all, I want to acknowledge and completely validate that the feeling that the role we have and the stake we have may seem important to us, but can seem completely irrelevant toward leaders is valid, especially in the feelings post COP27 when it can feel like, well, the action didn't actually reflect what I want to see, or well, it didn't actually have the urgency that I want to see. So that can completely make sense about why it can seem like, okay, I'm campaigning, I'm caring, but they're not listening. And I think that feeling sometimes of talking to a brick wall can be really relatable. And I can say personally as an activist, that's definitely something that I felt. However, as I kind of mentioned briefly answering the last question, something that we have to acknowledge is that ultimately the climate crisis would not be this high on world leaders' agendas if it wasn't for the action of young people, because of the audacity of young people to really make a scene and to talk about climate change and to really force world leaders to listen. It means that climate change is now a topic that is recognized in every household. It means that it's frequently on the news, maybe not as frequently as we want to, but it means that this issue is pushed into mainstream media and it's now being involved in education curriculums and in universities. And so because of that, I think a lot of that drive for that change has to be attributed to young people. And without our passion, I really genuinely believe that those steps wouldn't happen. In addition to that, sometimes in activism, we very much talk about the idea of having a seat at the table. But I think what's so incredible about the youth activism movement is that we've really built our own table. We've said, okay, this system and this world and this politics isn't designed to be sustainable, and it isn't designed to listen to our voice. So instead of that, we're going to really create our own system. We're going to create our own kind of activist movement that really makes the world listen and makes the world consider how it looks at things and how it prioritizes things. So I think kind of more from a detached perspective, while the actions may be not what we want to see, they wouldn't even be in the place that they are at without youth activism. And I think in terms of our relevance at events like COP27, ultimately, I think if you're looking at the outcomes that happened and you're really kind of feeling disappointed by that, if anything, I think that should give you more motivation to recognize how important your voice is, because it's without hearing our perspectives that world leaders are going to have no idea about what we want to see. If we stay silent and if we give up, that doesn't give anyone any more kind of perspective. If we're frustrated that they're not understanding our lived experience of climate change or of climate action, and then we go silent, that's not going to change. They're not going to suddenly decide, you know what, the young people have quietened down, let's fix climate change. Instead, it's going to have a very opposite effect. So if you are feeling disheartened and you are worried about your relevance kind of in the bigger picture, I think that gives you more reason to shout a bit louder and to make sure that they're hearing you and that your perspective is being understood and acted on. In a very concrete way, YCA had the opportunity to go to COP26, where we as young people saw directly the impact that we can have. And I know Shanona and I spent an ample amount of time in the Blue Zone, and at times it did feel overwhelming, and it did definitely feel like perhaps this wasn't a room that we were meant to be in, to be honest. But I think by almost infiltrating it and by making sure our presence was known, that was really powerful, I think, both for us and for the people around us who we got to meet. And so our relevance is important because this system isn't going to be reshaped or redesigned without our voice, and ultimately we wouldn't want it to be. We talk a lot about building a future for future generations that's sustainable, but to do that we need to understand like the perspective of today's and future world leaders. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers that and that gives some reassurance, because it can be disheartening.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Poppy. I think you've covered a lot of things that a lot of young people will be feeling, and hopefully will, enjoy hearing from someone else. Like you said, I just wanted to reiterate that I think one thing that we advocate for as a youth group, as a youth-led group, is that young people are extremely important in the terms of like the ideas that we can bring and the innovation that we can create. And I think we're in a really unique point where a lot of us see things very holistically. We were some of the first people to appreciate how social injustice and climate injustice are linked and things like that. I think it's really important to almost like recognize our uniqueness and recognize that we're not going to agree with everything that everyone is doing, but that's, like you mentioned, why voices are so important and why the voices of every underrepresented group are important, not just young people. So I think what I would want to say to young people is it's okay, like you mentioned, to feel overwhelmed and to feel like this isn't the place for you, but just know that there is a place for you. We like to say that there's no one form of activism for everybody. There's different things. So yeah, keep fighting, and I hope that this video has helped inspire you guys. So that's all the questions that we have. I just wanted to come to Alfred and then Lily for your final thoughts on COP27, maybe what you're hoping for in the future.
Well, if I'm okay to start, overall, as I said, I thought that I was very pleased with the losses and damage fund. I thought that was excellent, and I think that when it comes to climate action, there's sort of two parts. One which is about actually fixing damage that's already occurred. Of course, there's been a lot of that since the effects already taken place. And the second responsibility we have is actually fighting climate change itself, not just the effects it has. And that's more in terms of ensuring that we don't have even more losses and damages, and we don't continue to have these effects devastate our planet. So I would say that COP27 was overall very good with the sort of first half in terms of tackling the damages and losses that have already taken place, but it didn't do much in terms of protecting us from future damages and losses. So I would say that yes, part of what we wanted was accomplished, but it is more a case of that we wanted more than this, but still happy with what we got.
Perfect. Thank you, Alfred. And Lily, yeah, just to wrap us up, what are your feelings?
Yeah, I think everybody's brought such amazing points today, and COP is such a big issue, and it's been going on for such a long time, and kind of, as we've all kind of touched upon in some way, we are making progress. It is possibly a bit too slow, in my opinion, but we are making progress. And I think, as many of us have said, the impact that youth have had, especially in the last like 10-15 years, has really been incredible globally. And we should never forget the power that each of us individually has as young people to make change, because if one person decided, no, I'm not going to make that change, then we'd be even further behind than we would be today. And like, each person really does have the power to make so much change. And I think us as young people, yes, it's often a struggle to get our voices amplified, especially in rooms where we don't see ourselves represented. But that's all the more reason for us to be as loud as possible and kind of shout our opinions as loud as we can to whoever we can, so that we can make change and make progress. And the things that have been discussed in COP and the decisions that have been made, that we can help facilitate the action and make the changes that we want to see.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So guys, all the questions we have prepared today, we hope that answered some of your queries, or even brought some things up that you hadn't thought about before. And I just want to leave you guys with a message, is that young people, like we've all mentioned, are extremely important, and we want you guys to keep fighting for what's important to you. If it's climate injustice, if it's climate action, then perfect. If it's not, then we hope that you have been empowered, speak up and do what you feel is right for the planet and for future generations. And I think one more important thing is that what we have spoken about today is not everything. This list is it's not exhaustive. So we hope that this continues discussions. Our social media is always open, and we will be continuing to talk about these things that are really important to us and to young people in Wales. So please look out for those things, and we hope you enjoyed hearing all of our lovely members' thoughts and opinions, and we will see you next time we do something like this. Okay, thank you.